My name is Clara Whitman. I'm 68 years old, a retired nurse, and I live alone in a small house in Bend, Oregon. Most days are quiet, and that's how I like them. I wake early, make my coffee the same way I did when Richard was alive, and let the morning move at its own pace. The house doesn't speak much these days, but I've come to appreciate the silence. It doesn't judge. It doesn't remind me of what I've lost. That morning I was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table when the phone rang. The clock on the stove read 8:15 a.m., though it blinked like it always did after the power went out in the wind last week. I reached across the counter, careful with my shoulder, and saw the caller ID. It was Elliot, my son-in-law. Elliot never called me directly unless something needed to be managed. When I picked up, his voice was as smooth and flat as glass. He said there would be a formal birthday dinner this Saturday for his mother, Elaine, at their estate near Lake Oswego. It would begin at 6 sharp with cocktails beforehand. He used the word cocktails the way some people say traffic, with mild annoyance. Then came the instruction. Cocktail attire is expected, Clara. I know it's a bit of a drive, but it would mean a lot to Melissa if you came. His tone didn't match the sentiment. It felt like reading someone else's handwriting. Familiar enough to make out, but distant enough to feel like a message passed along rather than meant. I told him I'd be there. He paused for a beat, then said, "Good. See you then." The call ended without warmth, just the soft click of disconnection. I set the phone down and sat for a long moment listening to the refrigerator hum. The corners of the kitchen felt smaller somehow. My hands found the mug again. The coffee had gone cold. When you've spent most of your life helping others, you learn to read what isn't being said. The message wasn't really about attending the party. It was about expectations, about showing up the right way, looking the part, staying out of the way. I walked to my room and opened the closet. The dresses hung neatly untouched for months. Some still carried the faint scent of cedar. There was one that might work. Navy blue, simple neckline, clean lines. I'd worn it to Nora's baptism. It still held its shape. From the hallway chest, I pulled out a gift I had prepared weeks ago. A photo frame I had refinished by hand. Walnut. The wood was warm, smooth. I'd chosen it because it felt honest. I wrapped it in soft paper and placed it in a small gift bag, one with a gold ribbon that had been reused once or twice. I ironed it flat the best I could. Back in the kitchen, I sat down again. The second chair stayed empty, just like always. That was Richard's chair. His glasses were still in the drawer beside it. Sometimes I left the newspaper folded on his side, a habit I never broke. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was hope. Either way, it was mine to keep. The invitation hadn't surprised me. Not really. I knew what Elaine's parties were like. Crystal glasses, linen table runners, servers who barely blinked. People who smelled like money and wore it like a shield. I'd been to one of them years ago just once, and I remembered the way someone looked at my shoes like I'd stepped into the wrong room. Still, I agreed to come, because Melissa would be there. And even if she didn't say it, even if she never asked directly, I knew part of her wanted me to show up. Maybe not for long, maybe just long enough to prove I still cared. It's strange how we dress for places where we know we won't belong, as if fabric could soften the weight of being measured. But I had learned long ago that showing up even in quiet discomfort was a kind of love, and love, even when stretched thin, still held. That night, I hung the navy dress on the bathroom door and laid out the low black heels I hadn't worn since Richard's funeral. They needed a little polish. The left one had a scratch near the toe. I found an old cloth and worked at it gently. Not to impress, just to feel ready. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. 68. Still standing. Still trying. I didn't see a woman who belonged in cocktail parties or private estates. I saw someone who had held hands in hospital rooms at 2 a.m. Someone who had sat quietly beside mothers who didn't get good news. Someone who still believed in showing up, even when you know you'll be overlooked. Even when you're reminded that kindness isn't part of the dress code. Sometimes the quietest people in the room carry the heaviest stories. And sometimes they show up anyway. The sky over the Cascades was cloudless, that kind of sharp Oregon blue that made everything seem more awake than it should be. Clara drove with both hands steady on the wheel, the navy dress hanging behind her in the back seat, swaying slightly each time the road curved. The photo frame sat in the passenger seat, wrapped carefully in white paper, with edges she had smoothed flat over and over again that morning. Highway 97 stretched ahead like a ribbon tied to something she wasn't sure she wanted to reach. She passed the mile markers one by one, her thoughts slipping between the present and the quiet pull of memory. Richard would have driven on a day like this, whistling low through his teeth, tapping the steering wheel during radio commercials. He had loved the open road. Clara had always been more focused on the destination, but not today. Today she wasn't rushing to arrive. She thought about the call, about Elliot's voice polished like a hallway floor, about Melissa's silence. She had replayed the conversation 3 times already, and not once could she remember hearing the word mother. Not even once. The car ahead of her drifted onto the shoulder hazard lights, blinking fast and frantic. As Clara passed, she caught a glimpse of a woman leaning against the driver's side door, one hand braced on the frame, the other pressed tight against her chest. Clara didn't hesitate. She flipped on her signal, pulled over, and shifted into park. Her training, though retired, never left her. She kept a small emergency kit in the trunk next to a folded flannel blanket and a flashlight that barely worked. By the time she reached the other car, she had gloves in her pocket and her instincts fully awake. The woman looked to be around her age, maybe a few years younger, dressed in slacks and a yellow wool coat that clashed against her pale face. Her breathing was shallow, her forehead slick with sweat. She didn't look up when Clara crouched beside her. "You're okay." Clara kept her voice low and steady. "Tell me your name." The woman's eyes fluttered open. "Joanna," she whispered. "Chest hurts. Tight." Clara nodded and gently moved her hand to feel the woman's pulse. Fast. Not wild, but far from calm. She asked about medication allergies history. The answers came in clipped phrases between strained breaths. No nitroglycerin. No known heart problems. Just a sudden tightness, then pain down the left arm. Clara took out her phone and dialed emergency services. She gave the dispatcher clear coordinates and symptoms using short, direct language. She had done this 100 times before, maybe more, but never on the side of a highway, not in her good shoes. The minutes crawled, but Clara never let Joanna see her check the time. She kept talking, asking simple questions, trying to distract her. "Do you have kids? Where were you headed? What kind of tea do you like when it's cold?" Joanna's fingers gripped Clara's wrist like a child afraid to fall asleep. "Thank you," she murmured. "You didn't have to stop." Clara smiled gently, pressing 2 fingers against the woman's neck again. "That's the thing about emergencies. You don't schedule them. They sat like that for 10 minutes. The wind picked up once brushing hair across Clara's face. She didn't move. She just held Joanna's hand and waited for the sound of help. The ambulance arrived with the kind of suddenness that always felt too loud. 2 EMTs jumped out, one with a bag, one with a stretcher. Clara stepped back and answered their questions quickly. She helped lift Joanna onto the gurney, tucking the yellow coat around her shoulders. As they prepared to close the doors, Joanna reached for her again. Her hand was trembling. "You saved me. You know that, right?" Clara squeezed her fingers. "I did what I was trained to do, that's all." The EMT gave Clara a short nod, respectful but rushed. Then the door shut, and the siren chirped once before fading into the distance. Clara stood on the shoulder for a moment longer, watching the taillights disappear. Back in her car, the photo frame had slid against the door. She picked it up and set it straight again. Her watch read 11:42 a.m. She was going to be late. Maybe very late. But her hands were steady, her heart calm. Her shoulder ached a little from kneeling. Still, she drove forward. Not because she thought the dinner would be any better. Not because she believed they would understand. But because Melissa would be there. And because sometimes showing up even after detouring through someone else's pain was what you did when you remembered who you were. The trees outside blurred with motion. Clara kept driving, the sky bright, the road long, and her mind strangely at peace. Somewhere behind her, a woman she barely knew was breathing easier because Clara had stopped. And that, for now, was enough. The driveway curved like a question mark through the manicured lawn. Clara pulled in behind a row of sleek cars, none older than 5 years. Her Toyota looked like it had wandered into the wrong neighborhood, a little too tired, a little too honest. The clock on the dash read 5:58 p.m. The detour had cost her nearly an hour, but she had made it. She checked herself in the rearview mirror. Her blouse had a faint smear near the collar, the result of leaning over Joanna to adjust her coat. She had tried to wipe it off with a napkin from the glove box, but it had only smudged. Her hair had loosened from the clip. She pressed her hands into her lap and exhaled slowly. Then she stepped out. The house stood tall in quiet windows glowing with soft gold light. Classical music drifted faintly from somewhere inside, the kind that signaled everything was under control. Clara walked up the path with the gift bag in one hand, her heels catching once on the uneven stone. At the door, she paused. The stained glass panels gave her a warped view of movement and raised glasses. She rang the bell. Elaine Harrington answered with a smile that lasted half a second. Then her eyes traveled down Clara's blouse and over the gift bag. Her lips thinned. Clara offered a soft hello and held out the present. Elaine took it with 2 fingers as if it were something damp. "Well, you made it?" Elaine said, her tone light but sharpened. "We were starting to think the GPS had eaten you." Clara tried to explain she had stopped to help someone on the highway. There had been a medical emergency, a woman in distress. Elaine tilted her head slightly. "I see. Very noble. And yet..." She trailed off and motioned for Clara to follow. Inside, the air was cool and crisp with expensive scent. Everything gleamed. Marble floors, a chandelier like a floating sculpture. Guests sipped wine in the living room, all polished and poised. Clara felt the warmth leave her cheeks and settle low in her chest. Melissa appeared from the hallway. She looked beautiful in a soft gray dress with pearl earrings. Her eyes lit up when she saw her mother, then dimmed a little when she took in the stain. "You came," she said, stepping forward. Clara reached to touch her hand. "Of course I did." But Melissa's eyes flicked sideways toward Elliot. He stood near the fireplace holding a drink and speaking to a man in a suit. When he noticed Clara, he didn't move toward her. He gave a tight smile, lifted his glass a half inch, and went back to his conversation. Clara let her hand fall. Elaine turned to a passing server and handed off the gift. "Put that with the others. Maybe in the mudroom." She turned back to Clara. "We're just about to sit down. I'm afraid all the seats at the table are taken, but if you're comfortable by the kitchen, the staff has a small table they use during events. I'm sure they wouldn't mind." Something broke quietly inside Clara, like a thread pulled too far. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She looked at Melissa, who opened her mouth but said nothing. Elliot was watching now. So were a few guests. Clara felt them measure her. She placed her purse gently on the nearest side table, adjusted the strap, and whispered more to herself than anyone. "I suppose kindness doesn't mean very much here." Then she turned and walked back through the hallway, her shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. No one followed. Outside, the evening had cooled. The trees rustled faintly along the edge of the lawn. Clara reached her car and paused. She looked down at her blouse, ran a finger over the place where the stain had set in. She thought of Joanna's hand in hers, of the way her breathing had steadied, of the gratitude in her voice. She opened the car door and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The party behind her continued untouched. Inside those walls, nothing had changed, but Clara had. In the quiet hum of the dashboard, she found no anger, only a strange kind of clarity. Some rooms were never meant for people like her, and that was no longer something to mourn. Clara had just reached the edge of the driveway when she heard the sound of polished heels against stone. The front doors opened behind her, and the low hum of conversation from inside dipped into silence. She didn't turn right away. Her hand was already on the door handle of her car, her mind already halfway gone from this place. But something in the stillness made her pause. She turned and saw a woman stepping confidently through the entryway. Tall, composed, wearing a deep emerald gown that caught the porch light in soft waves. Clara recognized her instantly. Joanna, the same woman she had pulled from the side of Highway 97, now standing as if the morning had never happened, except for the way her eyes locked on Clara and softened. Joanna crossed the driveway without hesitation. The guests at the entrance, frozen in confusion, parted as she passed. Elliot stood on the steps, jaw tight. Elaine blinked once, then again, as if trying to decide whether to greet her or hide. Melissa's hand covered her mouth. Joanna stopped in front of Clara and pulled her into a gentle embrace. Clara felt her spine stiffen for a second, then melt. Joanna stepped back just enough to look her in the eye. "You didn't even know my name this morning, and you still stayed with me. I won't forget that." Then she turned to the house, her voice lifting just enough to carry through the entryway. "This woman saved my life today. I was having chest pain on the side of the road and she stopped. She called for help. She stayed with me until the ambulance came. I had never seen her before in my life, but she didn't hesitate." The silence deepened. A few guests shifted their weight. Elliot took one slow step forward, his face unreadable. Elaine's hand tightened around her champagne flute. Joanna looked at them both. "You treated her like she didn't matter, like she was less than everyone else in that room. But I know what she did for me, and I know who she is." Elliot opened his mouth, then closed it. Elaine looked to Melissa, who now had tears in her eyes. Melissa stepped toward her mother, quiet and shaking. "Mom, I should have said something. I should have done something. I didn't know what happened." Clara studied her face for a long second. Then she reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Melissa's ear. "What matters is what you do now." Joanna turned to Clara again and smiled. "I don't know what your dinner plans are, but I'd very much like you to come back inside. I saved a seat at my table, and I hope you'll take it." Clara looked at the house once more. It hadn't changed. The walls were still polished, the lighting soft. But something in the air felt different. Lighter. As if someone had cracked a window and let the truth drift through. She nodded. I'd like that. Together they walked back up the steps. Joanna slipped her arm gently around Clara's. Behind them, Elliot stepped aside without a word. Elaine's smile was tight and trembling. Inside the room quieted again. But it wasn't the same quiet. It was the kind that came with awareness. The kind that lingered after something had shifted. Clara didn't need an apology. She had been seen. And not just for what she did that morning, but for who she still was. At the table, Joanna pulled out the chair beside hers and gestured. Sit here. You belong. And for the first time that evening, Clara believed it.